Hi, everybody, and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Jack Canfield. My guest today is my new friend, Elaine Kennelly, the author of Finding Peace After a Suicide Loss. And Elaine and her husband, Tom, lost their 18-year-old son to suicide. And in her book, she describes her three-part process to healing. And Elaine shares that her suicide grief journey was difficult and complex, but the good news is that her marriage survived and she has peace. And as she says, yes, even joy once again. Welcome to the show, Elaine.
Well, thank you. It's a joy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
You're very welcome. You know, it's interesting. My wife's father committed suicide when she was 8. And I don't think most people really know how prevalent suicides are in our culture, how many people commit suicide every year. Can you put into perspective how big a problem suicide actually is?
It is a huge problem, especially after 2020 with COVID. Last year, over 48,000 deaths were by suicide. There were roughly 19,000 homicides, but there were 93,000 deaths from drug overdoses, many of which of those haven't been categorically assigned to the suicide statistic. But it is a huge problem. And for every suicide, the stats tell us that there are 100 people affected by it. Those numbers are into the millions. And that's in America alone. Over worldwide last year, there were 1.3 million suicides. So it's a huge problem. And the people that are left behind need help in healing.
Wow. Now, I know you've gone through this, and your book is fabulous, by the way. So I know many people believe that suicide grief is so challenging to the point that it becomes overwhelming and simply too much to handle. Why? Why would people believe that?
Well, the massive pain in suicide survival is that your loved one chose to leave. That's the crux of the problem, Jack. It's the choice, and we desperately want to know why. And at the same time, suicide is such a horrific pain. At the beginning, you're stunned. We were stunned. We never thought this would happen in our family. And there's this huge hole, this gap in your understanding between what you believe and what actually happened. We believed our son Matthew would be healed. He had been under psychiatric care since age 12. And we just thought that surely God would heal him. And what really happened was that he died, and that put us into this horrible situation of not understanding what went wrong. What did we do wrong? I mean, the situation after suicide loss is not only chaotic, it's complex. So I am so happy to share this book with you and your audience because I know it will help people heal.
Mm-hmm. Now, in your book, you talk about a 3-part process to healing after suicide loss. Can you share those 3 steps that you came up with us?
Yes. The first one, of course, is the death itself. And it is such a sad and sorrowful time. And, you know, what happened was that I believed a whole string of lies. But the most serious lie that I believed was that my son didn't love me, God didn't love me, I didn't deserve to be healed, and I would never heal. And I was plunged into this pit, you know, and I thought I deserved it. And so in the second part of the book, I actually went back into my pain because I had healed and then decided that I needed to put this book into people's hands so they could also be healed. And I went back into my pain and I figured out the 6 battles that I faced and I defined them. Because I think that's very important for healing is to know what your battles are, what are they named, and how are you going to overcome them. And then the third part of the book was the fun part of the book. I talked about my healing. And again, I had to go back into the pain to figure out what were the actual 7 steps to healing. And it's very interesting because you know what the first one was? The first one
Tell me.
was. And it was such a simple question. And it didn't really come into my mind for almost 20 years. Elaine, do you want to be healed? And I had to answer that question. I mean, you think, isn't that a silly question, a stupid question? Of course you want to be healed. But when you feel that you don't deserve to be healed, that you should be in that pit of despair and bitterness and anger, it's hard to get yourself out of that. So that was my first step to healing.
Interesting. Now you talk about 6 battles. Let's discuss a couple of those. I'm curious, part 3, finding hope and healing. What was one of the most important steps there? What battle did you have to face?
The battle for me personally, the biggest battle was guilt. I think as a mother, you just feel like part of the process. I must have done something wrong. You beat yourself up. You have that negative mindset and you repeat that recording in your brain that it was you. There must have been something about you. And so the whole battle with guilt was very difficult for me to overcome. And then I was very angry at God. I really thought God didn't love me. He had deserted me. He had abandoned me. I was spurned by God, and I felt so alone. I was really not able to cope. But when I figured out the hope and healing part of it, the first thing, of course, after I answered the question, yes, Elaine, I want to get well, then I went on to realize that I had to pray. I had really put God on the back burner of my life, had ignored him. I thought, I can heal all by myself. Thank you very much. And that wasn't the case. But that whole venting of those feelings and just, letting it all out. And sometimes I actually screamed because I just needed to let God know how miserable I was. And then he could help me heal. And it was a beautiful beginning for me. I was so angry, but I decided that I had to smile. You think that humans would know how to smile, but when you're in the pit for a long time, it's hard to smile. So I kind of wiped the chip off my shoulder and I smiled at strangers even. And it was amazing, Jack, what that did for me, because guess what? They smiled back. And that brought me joy. And I thought, there's a lot of hurting people in the world. Maybe they need my smiles. And so it was a wonderful journey for me to pray, to smile, again, to realize that I couldn't heal by myself. And as those baby steps of healing took place and I started giving myself away, the harvest principle, you give yourself away and you get more back in return. And I started with little tiny baby steps of giving myself away in other ways. And it just all came back to me in healing. And I was able to be thankful again. Gratitude is a huge healer. And I was able to be thankful for what I had over what I lost. And so I learned a lot of lessons about myself. I learned some wonderful truths about God. And in each one of my chapters, I talk about healing truths, because I do believe when you are in that aftermath of a suicide, you believe lies. So I was glad that I could put it together in this simple process of the battles and then the healing.
Yeah, that's good. First of all, your book is really structured well in the sense that it takes us through that journey. I'm just thinking of one of the things that I know about life, and is that someone once said there are 2 fears: fear of not having enough and fear of not being enough. And I think as a parent, when your child commits suicide, you don't have to, but you take on the belief that I'm not enough. If only I had done more. If only I had done this. If only I had said that. I know with my wife, with her father, she was 8 years old, and she thought, I should have done something so Daddy would have loved me enough to stay around. I could have said something. It took her years to realize it wasn't an 8-year-old's job to keep her father alive. And it just overwhelmed her self-esteem for years. And, I think what's interesting about your story is it took 20 years for you to move through that journey. Do you think if people have your book and they know the steps that you went through, they can cut that down in time?
Yes, I really firmly believe that. We had so few helpers around us. Our church didn't support us. Our friends weren't there. I know that they don't know what to say, so they say nothing at all. But if I could encourage your audience to also remember that they need to just be there with people who are hurting. It's that ministry of presence. You're just there with them. Nothing you say is really going to help. But this book, I think, will go through my struggles. And I write it, as you know, in a then and now format. So I actually go back and share with them what I was thinking, how I was feeling, how did I get over that. So I really do think this will be a tremendous source of power for them and truth for them. And it will lead them into a path of healing. I know it will.
I'm curious if someone has a friend or a family member who, their son or daughter or anyone in their family committed suicide. I'm just curious if I was in that case and I wanted to give your book to them, is there should I give it to them immediately? Should I wait a while? What would you counsel people?
I know it's never easy to figure that out. What I found that happens and works best is if you can visit with them and just leave the book at their house. You don't even have to say anything about it. And you know how it is with books. People pick them up and maybe read a page or two, or they finally get interested in it, or they feel they need it. And I think it's just good for them to have it. We don't have to say much, but I think the title of the book says it all. It's about finding peace after a suicide loss. And I might add that I have found joy again in my life. So I really think if you just get the book, if you have to mail the book, that would be okay too, because if they can't read it one day, they'll put it aside. But there is some day that they will open it up and read it.
That's good. Well, I'm really glad you wrote it because I think it's a very powerful book. So congratulations on that. Just, one last thing, you've kind of talked about this, you're now a very ebullient, happy, effusive person, and you're doing this work out there in the world. What keeps you going and making this such a central part of your life?
Well, I actually think of myself, Jack, as a wounded healer. I didn't coin that phrase. It was written by a book of that same title, The Wounded Healer by Henry Nouwen. And it's the fact that you must not only look after your own pain, but that you be prepared to heal the wounds of others. And I really have a big heart for helping other people because I was so plunged into that pit of bitterness and I stayed there. And I know it's hard to crawl out. So I'm very empathetic and passionate about helping people. I really, truly also believe that if someone would read my book and understand that the pain for the family is so overwhelming, that might even keep them from completing the act of suicide. So I do feel that I can help others, and I'm on that path to actually giving joy again. And as our marriage made it, you have to work through all those problems of blame and stigma and rejection. But I think that I've given principles where people will be able to work those issues through.
Very good. Very good. Well, where can people get your book? Let's start with that.
Well, I would encourage everyone to go to my website, suicidehealing.com. I have a blog there every week. It's a beautiful blog, and it always deals with this topic of healing. And of course, the book is available everywhere in bookstores and online on Amazon, but I also sell the book on my website. It's there. They can get an autographed signed copy. So suicidehealing.com would be a valuable resource for those who are hurting after a suicide loss.
And I know you're also available as a speaker. They can contact you there as well for that?
Yes, I have a media page there and a contact phone number. Everything's there. I would love to talk to groups, Jack.
Oh, beautiful. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for doing this work, Elaine. I really appreciate it. And thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you. It was great. And I want to tell you, I love the Chicken Soup for the Soul books. And you know that you've helped many through those books. You know that, don't you?
I do. And now we're part of the same team. We're out there helping people.
Thank you so much. You have a great day.
All right, you too. And thank you all for joining us who are watching us today. This is a great book that deserves to be read. Unfortunately, this problem is a lot larger than we thought, and a lot of people in pain and suffering. So let's make sure we can help alleviate that by sharing the wisdom that Elaine has with those people that might be touched by that. So again, tune in next week. I'll have another thought leader on who can bring you information, inspiration, and tools that can help you live a more happy, healthy, wealthy, and productive and impactful life. Until then, take good care of yourself. We'll see you next week.